International Relations Minister Naledi Pandor has appealed to SADC countries to commit to resourcing the defense mission in Mozambique. The region's standby force is assisting Mozambique to fight terrorism and insurgency in the northern territory of Cabo Delgado province. In her opening address to the SADC ministerial meeting today, she explained that the mission was in dire straits due to a lack of resources and other challenges. The SADC standby force was deployed in July last year, and their mandate is set to wrap up next week. However, heads of state are meeting on Friday and are expected to extend the mandate further. Pandor has called on her counterparts in the region to take the reports from the field that will be presented today into consideration.
All of us to take their reports to heart and to respond to their courage and determination by ensuring that we act on the challenges they table before us and on the needs they have stipulated as urgently required to ensure the success of the mission that all of us as member states approved. It is vitally important, colleagues, that we, as the SADC executive ministers, ensure full support to the mission and ensure that we as SADC succeed in repelling the terrorists that are posing a threat not just to Mozambique, but to the entire region. It is critical that whatever resource we have available is rendered as support to our mission so that we succeed.
Professor William Gumede is an associate professor at the School of Governance at the University of the Witwatersrand, and he joins us now via Zoom to talk about this SADC Heads of State meeting. Prof, always good to talk to you. Happy New Year.
No, thank you for having me, and happy New Year to you, but also happy New Year to viewers, and hope everyone will have a blessed 2022.
Yeah, it looks like it's going to be a challenging year for SADC, though. I mean, this first meeting of heads of state and Mozambique, it looks like a situation really that we knew we're going to get to this point even before we started, because resourcing has always been an issue.
Yes, unfortunately, the crisis has actually worsened in Mozambique. I mean, you remember last year, it was located in the province called Cabo Delgado in the northern part of Mozambique. Now, what has happened since sort of late December, late November, it has actually expanded to Niassa province, despite the fact that we've got a SADC peacekeeping force, of course, and also Rwanda troops there. So the Mozambican government have really struggled to contain the insurgency there.
So what do they do? It sounds as if the only way to manage this, apart from sitting on the at tables and also trying to fix some of the political issues in the country, more troops are required on the ground, but it seems as if they can hardly afford to keep the ones they have on the ground as it is.
So the solution here is, of course, it's a two-pronged solution. I mean, the one, of course, is bringing more boots on the ground there, bringing more SADC countries to put their boots on the ground. I mean, again, that's a very difficult one because not many African countries, and specifically Southern African countries, want to send in their troops to another country. That's one part of it. But I think what has so far happened, that the Mozambican government haven't dealt with the cause of the conflict, and there's a couple of reasons for the conflict. And of course, first is poor governance in the country itself, but also in the province. The second thing is lack of public service delivery. I mean, there's been no delivery really in that region, and also in the provinces, neighboring provinces. And the second thing is the third thing is there hasn't been inclusion. So, the benefits, the province of Cabo Delgado is a very mineral-rich province. Has been expanded the last couple of years, but unfortunately, ordinary citizens have not been benefiting, and it's just sort of big foreign companies and sort of the elites link to the Mozambican government. So ordinary people haven't benefited from that. And also, the Mozambican government, unfortunately, the last couple of years has marginalized opposition parties instead of bringing them closer and making them make governing inclusive. So unfortunately, yes, there's been troops on the ground, there's SADC troops, Rwandan troops, South African troops, but the other real problem hasn't been dealt with, as I say, is getting better governance and including the citizens there in the dividends of development.
So what you're suggesting is that these socio-political conditions make insurgent groups, militant groups like this more attractive and almost desirable for locals on the ground.
Absolutely. If a government is not inclusive and doesn't deliver services, you will get these sort of now religious insurgency. But it could have been anyone else. It could have been other military groups. It could have been just political military groups. It could have been gangs and so on. So that is when people are excluded and governments are not inclusive, don't deliver services, and especially in Mozambique. What has happened, like in many other countries, the government has only deliver for its own constituencies instead of the whole country. And then maybe, a very important thing that the government hasn't done, the government hasn't acknowledged to the people of Cabo Delgado and those sort of provinces who feel excluded, acknowledge that they've been excluded. So it's always important in a conflict, when you have a conflict in a country, is that the government must acknowledge to people, to say to them, look, we've neglected you, but we want to do certain things, to come back to the party and to include you in development.
So then if we listen to the language of the Minister of Foreign Affairs, International Relations, Dr. Pandor, does it point to perhaps a wrong focus, or they're not discussing the right things at this SADC meetings?
I don't think they discussing the whole, it's a holistic package to resolve the issue. Unfortunately, it's, most of the responses to terrorism in Africa, and it's not only, of course, here in Mozambique, but, in places like Nigeria and in other countries where there is a problem with military or rather Islamic militant insurgency, is that people don't focus, or leaders rather don't focus on on the root causes of the problems. They only focus on the military response. Now, the military response on its own is just not good enough. Of course, one has to have the military response, but then with the military response, as equally important is the governance response, which is not happening. If you look at the agenda and if you look at the discussion so far in SADC related to Mozambique, I have not seen any debate there dealing with the governance, the lack of governance and the governance response to the insurgency in northern Mozambique.
But I guess this is a difficult conversation for these leaders to have, isn't it? To say to someone, hang on, you need to get your house in order. You're not doing a great job of governance in your country. And generally, African states tend to shy away from those kinds of issues. And yet, it seems as if that's probably one of the crucial ones they should be having.
Absolutely. This actually is the conversation. The lack of governance, there's the fact that there's no service delivery. In those reasons, it's said there's a political parties there, opposition parties are being excluded. And the fact that ordinary people, they believe they are not part of the economic growth, they're not sharing in the spoils of economic growth. That's the conversation. And it's sad. That's what we want the SADC leaders to have, their conversation with the Mozambican leaders, to say, look, what is a political response? Yes, there's a military response, but what is a parallel response. The problem really, of course, is unfortunately, African leaders as peers don't talk about governance, to their peers, because I think many of them are also poorly governed. So, most of those SADC leaders who are in that meeting, they govern their countries poorly also, and they may not have militants or Islam militants and insurgency, but they have, citizens and civil movements and opposition parties are protesting against poor service delivery in their countries also. So it's a very difficult conversation, but this is the most conversation to be had, not only in Mozambique, of course, but in the whole of SADC.
So, Prof, the picture you're painting isn't a very optimistic one, because I don't think we'll ever see those kinds of conversations taking place. We talk about sovereignty and so on and so forth, and yet the poor citizens on the ground are looking to their leaders to sort their problems out. How do we fix this?
I mean, it is extraordinary. Yes, as the leaders get together, African leaders get together, then they don't talk about the most important thing. And that is the reason why, since the end of colonialism, we've seen so many coups, we've seen so many civil wars, because leaders only focus on military responses to a conflict. They don't look at the root causes, the lack of service delivery and exclusion of people, and so on. And their peers in other countries don't talk to leaders where countries are in conflict about things. I think what is going to be very important is that civil society, if the leaders are not talking about it, the civil society in other African countries, in other SADC countries, begin to mount a response. So I think what needs to happen in this generation, particularly our generation now, civil society organizations like, say, in South Africa or in Botswana or in Namibia must now begin to talk about these issues if it happens in other countries. So we often don't see civil society groups or even the media or even academics actually talk to African leaders when their peers don't talk to them. So we'll have to see much more organized civil society response.
The trouble with socio-political issues is that they take time to turn the tide, and Mozambique doesn't have time. So what do they do in the interim? I guess it's the quick fix thing is try and get the troops on the ground, but it could be creating even more problems, I guess.
Yeah, actually, governance issues don't take time, and I know that's what people will say. Yeah. They say, let's get the military, let's get just more troops there, and that's a quick fix. It's not even a quick fix. It may be, immediately slow down insurgency, but it's not going to resolve the issue. So what now needs to do almost immediately is, with new troops, at the same time, there has to be a governance solution as the troops come in. So the troops go ahead without a governance solution, it's not going to be sustainable. So, if, for example, new troops arrive there, I think the Mozambican government must immediately acknowledge to the citizens, in these rebellious areas, to say to them, we failed you, but we are going to change and we're going to do something. So they have to say that. They haven't said it. If you look at the last 6 months, I have not heard a whimper from the Mozambican government accepting that they become people in these provinces. And then the second thing is also they'll have to bring in humanitarian aid and support for people with the troops. So not just the troops, because what is happening now, unfortunately, is ordinary people are suffering. There's a humanitarian crisis. People have lost their homes. Close to 2,000 people have died. Families have broken up. People are not getting food. So all of those things have to be done almost together as a response.
All right. Perhaps finally, Dr. Pandor said that this isn't a Mozambique problem, but this could be and probably will become a SADC problem. Is that something that you think might happen? Is that we'll start to see insurgencies in neighboring states if it's not dealt with properly and quickly? I see. This is a pattern. This is a trend. So if
leaders in countries in SADC don't become accountable, don't deliver services, exclude people, whether on an ethnic basis, whether on a regional basis, we will see much more insurgencies also in other countries. So it may not be Islam militants insurgencies, but it may be other kinds of political insurgencies. I think we'll see it increasingly in other African countries if leaders don't become responsive. So what the SADC needs to do, SADC leaders need to do, they will have to begin to have a conversation about accountable governance in order to prevent more insurgencies from people who feel excluded.
Professor William Gumede, thank you very much indeed for joining us. No doubt we'll have many conversations during 2022, but thank you so much for this one tonight.
Thank you for having me. All the best. Right. Bye.
That's one of our regular political commentators, Professor William Gumede, speaking about the extraordinary meeting of heads of state and government that's taking place on Friday, talking about some of the big issues that really need to be discussed. Apart from having troops on the ground, there needs some socio-political changes there. But as one former finance minister in a southern African country says, ruling parties rarely ever reform themselves out of power.